On the 6th day without sleep, Declan Hale started making mistakes. Small ones, first. A name forgotten. A number transposed. The kind of errors that meant nothing in isolation and everything in sequence. In a life where the wrong number on the wrong document could end someone's livelihood or begin someone's war. His assistant noticed on day 4. His security chief noticed on day 5. Neither of them said anything, because saying something to Declan Hale required a particular kind of courage that most people in his orbit had decided wasn't worth the cost. The nurse he'd been assigned noticed on her second visit. She didn't say anything. She said everything. "When did you last sleep?" Mara Quinn asked, not looking up from the blood pressure cuff she was adjusting on his arm. "I sleep," Declan said. "That's not an answer." She noted the reading. Then she looked at him directly, not the careful peripheral glance his staff had perfected, but straight at his face, with the particular attention of someone who had spent years looking at people who were trying to hide how bad things had gotten. "Your pressure is elevated. Your response time is slower than it was 3 days ago. You have a tremor in your left hand you're controlling well enough that most people wouldn't notice." She set the cuff down. "I notice." Declan looked at her. Nobody in this building talked to him like that. 6 days, he said. She didn't react with alarm. She didn't soften her expression into the careful sympathy he'd seen from the hospital staff after the surgery. The kind of sympathy that was really just managed discomfort. She simply nodded, wrote something in her notes and said, "Tell me why." He had not planned to tell her anything. Mara Quinn had come through the same agency as the 2 nurses before her placed, briefed, paid at a rate that purchased discretion and professional competence and the understanding that whatever happened in this apartment stayed in this apartment. She was 33, wore her scrubs like she'd been born in them, and had introduced herself on her first visit with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned that the fastest way to establish trust with a difficult patient was to be exactly as competent as advertised. She was round-faced and soft-voiced and built with the fullness of a woman who had long since made peace with taking up space, and she moved through his apartment with a comfort that suggested she had been in harder rooms and was not impressed by the address. He had expected to find her manageable. He had not expected her to be the first person in 6 days to ask him a direct question and wait for a real answer. Why was not a question his world asked. His world asked what, when, how much, and what do we do about it. Why was for people with the luxury of reflection, and Declan Hale had spent the better part of a decade building a life that moved too fast for reflection. But Mara Quinn was looking at him with patient, unhurried attention, her pen resting against her notepad, waiting. "My father died 11 days ago," he said. "I was with him. I held his hand. I watched him go." He looked at the window. "I haven't been able to close my eyes since without going back to that room." Mara was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone who didn't know what to say. The purposeful quiet of someone giving the truth the space it needed. "Are you trying to avoid the memory?" she said finally. "Or are you trying to stay with it?" Declan turned to look at her. "What's the difference?" "The difference is whether the sleeplessness is your mind protecting you from something," she said, "or your mind keeping you company with something you don't want to be alone with." He sat with that longer than he meant to. "The second one," he said. "I know," she said quietly. "I could see that." She wrote something else in her notes, and the scratch of her pen in the silent apartment was the most ordinary sound he had heard in 6 days, and something about the ordinariness of it, the simple, unhurried normalness of a woman writing in a notebook, made his chest ache with a feeling he had no vocabulary for yet. Declan thought he was describing a clinical symptom to a nurse who needed the information to do her job. He had no idea he had just said out loud, for the first time, something that had been pressing against the inside of his ribs for 11 days, and that Mara Quinn had already decided she wasn't leaving until he slept. She stayed past her shift that first night. Not because he asked. He wouldn't have asked if she had already understood that about him within the first 20 minutes. The particular pride of a man who had spent so long being the person others depended on that asking for anything felt like a structural failure. She stayed because she was a nurse, and her patient had not slept in 6 days, and sending him into another night alone with his own mind was not something she was willing to do. "I can stay," she said, at 11:30, when she should have been packing her bag. He looked at her. "You don't have to." "I'm aware," she said. "I'm offering." She pulled the chair closer to the window and sat in it. "You don't have to talk." You don't have to do anything. I'll be here. He sat on the bed, still dressed, and looked at her with the expression of someone encountering an unfamiliar protocol. Why, he said. Same word she'd used. Different weights. Because you shouldn't be alone with it, she said simply. And because I'm a nurse and my job is to sit with people in the hard hours. That's not a burden. It's actually what I'm here for. He lay back against the headboard. Not under the covers too much, too soon. She understood that without needing it explained, just back, with his eyes on the ceiling, and Mara sat in the chair with her own notes and the ambient sounds of the city 14 floors down, and the room settled into the quiet of two people who had agreed, without negotiating the terms, to simply be present in the same space. She had done this before, sat with patience in the hard hours. There was a particular quality to the silence of a room where someone was finally letting their guard down. She had learned to recognize it the way she recognized breath sounds, by texture and quality rather than volume. This silence had that quality. The specific release of a person who has stopped holding themselves together for an audience. She didn't talk. She didn't offer reassurance. She simply remained present in the chair, making the occasional note, listening to his breathing slow from the controlled rhythm of someone awake to the deeper cadence of someone going under. He was asleep in 40 minutes. Not the restless, resisting sleep of someone fighting their own exhaustion. Real sleep, the kind that came when the body finally understood it was safe enough to let go. Mara sat with it. She watched his breathing even out in increments, watched the controlled tension leave his shoulders the way water leaves when something stops holding it back, and she sat with the particular feeling of having done the thing she was trained to do, not the technical part, the human part, the part that couldn't be measured or documented, and knowing it had worked. She stayed until 4. On the way out, she passed his security chief in the hallway, a man named Croft who had been with Declan for 9 years, and who looked at her with an expression she would come to understand was a surprise held carefully in check. He's sleeping, she said. Croft looked at the closed door. He hasn't slept in 6 days, he said, as if she hadn't just told him. I know, she said. He will now. She drove home in the gray pre-dawn and sat in her car for a moment before going in. She had sat with a lot of patience in hard hours. She was good at it. She had learned how to be present without attaching, how to care without carrying, how to leave the hard room at the end of the shift and not bring it home with her. She sat in her car for longer than usual. She told herself it was just the early morning. On the 11th night, she arrived to find him standing at the kitchen counter with 2 cups already made and an expression that said he had been thinking about something for a while and had decided to stop thinking and start saying. My father would have liked you, he said. She set her bag down. Why? Because you say the true thing, he said. He had very little patience for anything else. He used to say that kindness without honesty was just manners, and manners were for strangers. He looked at the cups. You're not a stranger. Mara picked up her cup. When did that happen? She said. When did I stop being a stranger? Declan thought about it seriously, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate about him. He treated her questions like they deserved real answers, not deflections dressed as answers. Night 2, he said. You came back. You didn't have to. I'm a nurse, she said. Coming back is the job. You came back 40 minutes early, he said. Nurses don't do that. She held her cup with both hands and looked at him. Outside, November had fully arrived, the kind of cold that made the inside of any room feel more complete. The kitchen was warm. The coffee was good. The man across from her was telling her, in the specific way he told her things sideways, through observable facts, letting the meaning find her rather than delivering it directly, that she had mattered to him from the second night. She thought about the note under the lamp. You'll be all right. She thought about the chair at the angle she preferred. She thought about the book he'd remembered in passing. I know when it happened for me, she said. When? He said. When you said you were keeping your father company, she said. With sleeplessness. That you weren't avoiding the memory, you were staying with it. She paused. Most people don't know the difference. You did. And you told me the truth about it when you could have said anything else. She looked at him steadily. That's when I stopped being a nurse and started being. She stopped. Started being what? He said. Someone who was going to come back 40 minutes early. She said. The kitchen held the quiet of that for a moment. Then Declan Hale, who had not smiled in 11 days, smiled. He slept on day 7 because she stayed. He slept on day 8 because she came back. By day 10, his blood pressure had normalized. The tremor in his left hand was gone. And his assistant had reported, carefully and with visible relief, that the transposition errors had stopped. His body was repairing itself with the efficiency of a machine that had been given back its basic requirements. But that was not what was changing. What was changing was harder to document. It happened in pieces, in the spaces between the clinical tasks, the blood pressure readings and the medication checks and the wound assessments for the shoulder injury that had originally brought the agency into his life. In those spaces, Mara talked to him the way she talked to all her patients. Directly, without performance, interested in the truth rather than the comfortable version of it. She asked about his father. Not with the careful, sidelong sympathy that people had been offering for 11 days. The "I'm so sorry" delivered with the eyes already looking for the exit. The condolences that were really just social technology for getting through an uncomfortable moment. She asked the way she asked clinical questions. Specifically, genuinely expecting a real answer. What was he like? She said, one evening, sitting in the chair that had become, through repetition, hers. Declan had been looking at the city through the window. He turned. Like me, he said. But better at pretending it didn't cost him anything. You're not pretending, Mara said. No, he agreed. I gave that up around day 3. She looked at him with the expression he had come to recognize attentively without being intrusive, present without pressing. Tell me something he did that you've never told anyone, she said. He was quiet for a moment. He used to leave notes, he said finally. Under things. A book, a coffee mug, once under a car key. Just short things. 3 or 4 words. The kind of thing you find after he'd already left the room. He paused. I found one last week. Under the lamp on his nightstand. Said, you'll be all right. The apartment was very quiet. He wrote it for you, Mara said. I don't know when, Declan said. Before. While he still could. He left it there knowing I'd find it eventually. He looked at his hands. I've been carrying it in my pocket since. Mara didn't say anything. She didn't fill the silence with comfort or reassurance or any of the things people said when they didn't know what else to do. She sat with it and let him sit with it, and the room held them both in the particular way rooms hold the things that are said honestly in them. Outside the window, the city moved through its ordinary evening taxis and lit windows and people going home from things. All of it continuing regardless, indifferent to the man sitting on the edge of his bed holding a truth he'd been carrying alone for 11 days. Mara looked at him. At the set of his jaw, the particular tiredness behind his eyes was not the tiredness of sleeplessness alone, but of someone who had been performing steadiness for 11 days for the benefit of everyone around him. She had seen that specific exhaustion before. She had sat with it in hospital rooms at 2 in the morning, in small apartments where the curtains were still drawn at noon. In every version of the place a person goes when grief asks them to be alone with it. She had always stayed. He was right, she said eventually. Very quietly. Declan looked at her. You are going to be all right, she said. Not because grief ends. It doesn't. But because you're already doing the hardest part, sitting with it instead of running. Most people run. She paused. You stopped running on night 1 when you answered a question honestly. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in it. Not the controlled assessment she'd seen that first evening. Something older and quieter and more honest. You're unusual, he said. For a nurse. I'm not unusual, she said. You're just not used to people who don't need anything from you. He was quiet for a beat. Is that what this is? That's part of it, she said, and looked back at her notes, and did not elaborate, and he did not ask her to, and the room settled back into its comfortable quiet with something new in it that neither of them was quite ready to name. Mara believed she was doing what she was trained to do, sitting with a grieving patient in the hard hours, providing therapeutic presence. Nothing more complicated than that. She had no idea that a man named Vance, who had been waiting for a sign of vulnerability in Declan Hale for 2 years, had noticed the nurse's car outside the building 3 nights running and had started asking questions. The threat arrived the way most threats in Declan's world arrive, sideways, through someone else. She got the call on a Thursday afternoon, an hour before her shift. A man whose name she didn't recognize, speaking in the careful calm of someone who had prepared what they were going to say. He knew her name, her agency, her license number. He knew, he said, about the arrangement at the Hale residence. He thought she should understand that arrangements of that kind attracted attention. That attention sometimes had consequences. That it might be in her professional interest to find a different client. He didn't say what the consequences were. He didn't need to. Mara sat with the call for 10 minutes after it ended. She assessed it the way she assessed symptoms, what it told her, what it didn't, what the appropriate response was. Then she drove to Declan's building and arrived an hour early. Croft met her at the elevator with an expression that told her Declan already knew. She walked into the apartment to find him standing at the window with the particular stillness of someone who has received bad news and is deciding what to do with it. "Vance," he said before she could speak. "He's been looking for a pressure point for 2 years. He found me," she said. "Yes." He turned. His jaw was set in the way she had learned to read as controlled fury, not at her. She understood that immediately, at himself, at the situation, at the fact that something he hadn't protected had been reached. "I'm sorry. This is because of me." "I know," she said. "What are we doing about it?" He paused. The same way he'd paused the first night she'd stayed, that small recalibration, the adjustment to someone who didn't respond the way he was used to. "You should go home," he said. "Let me handle it. You don't need to be involved in this." "Declan." She set her bag on the table. "I'm a nurse. My entire job is being present in situations other people want to leave. I'm not going home because someone decided to use me to get to you. Tell me about Vance. Tell me what you know. We'll figure it out together." He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that she could see him weighing things. She wasn't party to the calculation of a man who had spent years doing everything alone, encountering the unfamiliar experience of someone offering to stand beside him. "You don't have to do this," he said. "No," she agreed. "I'm doing it anyway. Sit down." He sat. She stayed. They worked through it together with his knowledge of Vance's operation, her knowledge of the professional defense resources available through her licensing board, the specific mechanics of how a complaint of this nature would be filed and how it would be answered. Declan worked his phone with the focused precision of a man who had identified a problem and intended to resolve it completely. Mara made notes. She asked questions. She contributed what she had, which was less than his resources but more than nothing, and the combination of both made the problem considerably smaller than it had looked an hour earlier. At some point past midnight, he looked up from his phone and found her still at the table, still working, her reading glasses pushed up on her head and a cup of cold coffee beside her laptop. "You're tired," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "You said that the first night." It was true then, and it's still a deflection now. He stood and went to the kitchen and came back with a fresh cup. He set it in front of her without comment. She looked at the cup, then at him. "Thank you," she said. "It's coffee," he said. "I know what it is," she said. And she knew it was coffee, and she also knew it was the same quiet, practical care she had watched him extend to everyone in his orbit without naming it. Turned, for the first time, directly toward her. She knew the difference. She drank the coffee. She went back to her notes. Mara believed the work they were doing was going to resolve the threat before it became real. She had no idea that Vance, sensing he was losing his leverage, had already escalated, and that the escalation was going to arrive faster than either of them had prepared for. He moved against Mara's agency the following morning, a formal complaint filed through a shell identity, designed to trigger a review before anyone could respond. Her supervisor called at 8:15, before Mara had left Declan's building, and the call contained the word suspension in a sentence that also contained the word pending. She stood in the elevator lobby and processed it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she went back upstairs. Declan was already on the phone when she walked in. Croft was there. 2 people she'd never seen were there. The room had the focused, directed energy of a problem being approached from multiple angles simultaneously. Declan looked at her when she entered. Something in his face, the controlled fury she had learned to read, shifted at the edges. "They moved fast," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have anticipated. It doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is what we do in the next 6 hours. Talk to me." He talked to her. They worked for 6 hours straight, Mara with her laptop and her knowledge of the professional licensing system, Declan with his resources and his understanding of Vance's patterns and the particular mechanics of how men like Vance moved when they felt they were winning. Croft brought food at some point that neither of them ate until it was cold. The city outside the windows went through its whole ordinary day, indifferent. At 4 in the afternoon, the complaint was retracted. Not loudly, not dramatically. It simply ceased to exist in the system, withdrawn before it had been formally processed, the shell identity that had filed it quietly and thoroughly dismantled. The specific mechanics of how that happened, Mara did not ask about and was not told. She understood, in the way she understood most things about Declan's world, that there were rooms she didn't need to be in. What she did ask about, at 5 o'clock, sitting in the chair that was hers with the city going golden through the window, was something else entirely. "The note your father left," she said. "You'll be all right. Do you believe it yet?" Declan was quiet for a long moment. "More than I did 2 weeks ago," he said. "That's all belief ever is," she said. "More than yesterday. You don't have to arrive at it all at once." He looked at her, at the woman who had walked into his apartment on a Thursday, asked him the right question and stayed, who had sat in a chair because he was alone with something he didn't want to be alone with, who had come back up the elevator when most people would have gone home, who was sitting in his apartment at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in the chair that was hers, like she had always been here and intended to keep being here. "Mara," he said. "I know," she said. "I haven't said anything yet," he said. "You were going to say something about the agency and the professional arrangement and whether it's appropriate for me to still be sitting in this chair now that the case is technically resolved," she said. "You were going to be very careful about it. You were going to give me every opportunity to leave gracefully." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not leaving gracefully, just so we're clear." Something in his expression broke open. Not dramatically, just a small, profound shift. The particular undoing of a man who has been very carefully held together and has just encountered something that made holding together feel unnecessary. "I wasn't going to say that," he said. "I was going to ask if you wanted dinner." She smiled. "Yes," she said. "I want dinner." The agency officially closed the case 10 days later. By then, Declan Hale was sleeping. Not the reluctant, defended sleep of the first 6 days, but real sleep, the kind that repaired things. He had gone back to work with his full capacity restored, his team quietly and visibly relieved, the mistakes of the sleep-deprived week resolved and corrected. He had also, quietly and without the machinery of official arrangement, made the chair by the window unavailable to everyone else. Not by saying so, by simply leaving it there, at the angle Mara preferred, near the lamp she liked to read by, with a book she had mentioned once placed on its arm as casually as if it had always been there. She came on a Saturday afternoon, not a nursing visit, just a visit, and found the book on the chair and stood looking at it for a moment. "I mentioned that book once," she said. In passing, Declan said. "You remembered." "I remember most things you say," he said. "You tend to say things worth remembering." She picked up the book. She sat in the chair. He sat across from her. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did, continuing regardless, indifferent and permanent, entirely unaware of what had been rebuilt inside this apartment over the past 3 weeks. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Mara with the book open in her lap, Declan with his, which was not actually unusual because they had discovered in the 3rd week that they could exist in the same room without filling it, which was rarer than either of them had realized until they had found it in each other. At some point, Croft knocked and entered to deliver something to Declan, and looked at the two of them sitting in their respective chairs with their respective books in the late afternoon light with an expression that was the closest thing to sentimentality she had ever seen from him. He left without saying anything. She looked at Declan. He looked at her. "He approves," Declan said. "He's not subtle about it," she said. "No," Declan agreed. "He never has been." A pause. "He told me on day 8 that I should stop being an idiot." He said it while discussing a security protocol. It was clearly about something else. "What did you say?" "I said I was working on it," Declan said, which was true. Mara looked at her book, then at him. "What were you working on, exactly?" "Understanding," he said, "that the most important thing my father left me wasn't the note under the lamp." He held her gaze. It was the proof in how he lived, that being taken care of is not the same thing as being weak. That letting someone sit with you in the hard hours is not surrender. It is the bravest thing you can do. The apartment held that for a moment. "He really was right," Mara said softly. He usually was, Declan said. What did you tell him? She asked. Your father. At the end. He was quiet for a moment. That I was going to be all right, he said. He asked me if I was sure. I said no. He laughed. He paused. He said, good. That means you're paying attention. Mara held the book in her hands and looked at the man across from her, at a man who had not slept in 6 days and had let a stranger sit in a chair and had stayed awake long enough to be honest and had learned, in the worst weeks of his life, that the most important thing was not managing the pain but letting someone be present in it. He was right, she said. He usually was, Declan said. He reached across and covered her hand with his. Unhurried. Certain. The way he did everything he had decided. I'm paying attention. Here is what 6 days without sleep teaches you, if you let it. It teaches you that the body knows before the mind admits it. That the shaking hand and the transposed number and the name forgotten are not failures of discipline. They are the body's honest accounting of what it has been asked to carry without rest. Teaches you that grief is not an obstacle. It is a companion. The question is not how to make it go away, but how to stop running from it, how to sit down with it in the dark and let someone else sit down too. And it teaches you this. The people who change everything are rarely the ones who arrive with the right words. They are the ones who arrive and stay, who asks the question and waits for the real answer, who pulls the chair close and does not leave until something in the room is different. Declan Hale hadn't slept in 6 days. A nurse came at 7 and stayed until 4. Everything else followed from that. Before you go, I want to leave you with something real. Not a question to answer, but a thought to carry. If you have someone in your life who has ever sat in the chair, who has ever simply stayed when they could have left, I hope you know what that was worth. Not everyone gets that. Not everyone recognizes it when they do. If you've been the person in the chair for someone else, I hope you know it mattered. Even if they never said so. Especially if they never said so. The next story is already waiting. I think it's going to ask something of you that this one didn't.